Right, this is Adam Hawkins presenting my final presentation for CIT260. We got a lot to go through and I don't want to go over in time, so we'll jump right into it. So starting off, we're going to talk about static versus non-static variables. So a couple of differences. One is the static variable associated with the class as a whole, and a non-static instance of variables associated with each object's instance. So Java is an object-oriented programming language, which means we need to access methods and variables inside of the class. However, you can use different static versus non-static in Java. So we can learn that the static members are class level and can be accessed directly without any instance. So to look at a couple examples of that, so this is an example of a static function. So you can see here, we call the static variable the cell land view and refer to the crops as a whole. We're not talking about any particular object. So this comes from my crops view coding that we did. And you can see we're referring directly to the variable as a whole, not a specific object. In contrast to that, you can take a look. So this would be like a non-static function. So this comes from the player model. And you can see here where we are addressing the object of player directly and not talking about the function as a whole, but actually talking about the object of a player. So again, static, you can see from the example that we're calling a static method. We didn't call any object. It was just used to access the class name. And then in the non-static, we're accessing the object directly, and so that's where we'd use this example here. So moving on to arrays, we want to talk first about the difference between an array and an array list. So an array is a fixed size, where an array list is dynamic, which means it can change and it can grow automatically. Also on an array list, you can't contain any primitives like int, float, and double. So the variables, you have some trouble there. And then an array can be multi-dimensional, where an array list is always single. We talked a little about the conditions that can make an array better versus an array list, and when an array list would be better to use for an array. So one example I thought of where an array would be better is for performance. So if you look at the example where an array cannot resize, it is a fixed size, you set that size on the array, your performance would run better because your CPU isn't having to adjust and redo the sizing each time it changes, and wouldn't have to create pull elements from an old array to create a new array. And another example I thought of where an array would be better is you have to use the primitive data types that we referred to in the slide before. Where an array list would be better is, clearly when you have to do resizing. So for example, if you don't know what the size of the array is going to be, and there could be an infinite number of things that could go, the array list would be a better option to go for. So one of the examples that I pulled from an array list is this is from our player model. So you can see right here in the player model, we're looking at the class of the player and also looking down here, the class of the game. So we set both of these in an array list and as an array because there could be an infinite number of players and could be an infinite number of games. We don't set how many games someone could play. If they wanted to play multiple games off the same player, you could do that. And so we needed to use an array list instead of just using an array. So, moving on, so it says demonstrate through examples of code in your program the understanding of how to use a basic for statement and an index to go through and access each element stored in an array. So for this one, I did the map model. I looked at that one. So for the variables of rows and number of rows, so what we did is we set up our map as like a grid. And so there's different rows and different columns. So we have here the 4 of the different rows and the 4 of the different columns, and then increasing exponentially as you need to. Then it'll pull up different locations based off of where you wanted to go in the map. So I'll show some examples of those in just a little bit because we do use that again in the future. But this is just a basic example of when we use the for statement. So going on to for loops. So loops are used to execute a set of statements repeatedly until you meet a set of conditions. So you have to be careful when writing loops. You can do infinite loops and you can run out of memory. But loops are done in basic types. So in Java, you have things like for, while, do while. So I wanted to look a little bit. We're looking at basically the for and the for each loops. Sorry. And so this one we can look at. So basically the difference is, the practical difference is for and for each is that the case of indexable objects. You don't have to access the index. But a for would be significantly faster just because of the fact that you're not accessing the arrays. You're just talking about a particular thing. So the example I used here is from our game menu view. So you can see here that we pulled off. So on the game menu, we have the view of the map. So again, as I said before, we're going to take a look more at the map. And so we set up the map in a system of grids. And so you can see here we have, again, for the variable of the rows, and it would outprint different things based off of where you were. And then for the variable of columns, you can see where it pulls that up there. So, and it'll stay in this loop as long as you keep choosing one of these different options for the rows and the columns. So moving on to runtime errors. So in every program you have, let me read this. It says, demonstrate through examples of code in your program, you're understanding how to throw, propagate, and cache custom runtimes there in your program. So in every program you do, you're going to have errors, different, especially when you're asking a user to input different things. And so you have to write in these runtime errors or these exceptions and different things that you can do in order to catch any possible exception. So one of the examples I use here was crops control. So in this particular one, we were talking about the variable of the buy land. So we've got the variable land price, the acres to buy, the crops, and then it's going to throw some exceptions. So as part of our game, we asked the user to input the number of acres that they want to buy. And then we realized that it's possible that they could put a negative number. And so we create here that if the negative number, or the acres to buy, if you input a negative number, it'll give you an exception that a negative value is input. Again, going on, if you look at the acres to buy and the land price, so again, we ask them how much wheat that they wanted to use. So if their acres to buy and their land price is greater than the wheat, then it'll throw the exception, there is an insufficient amount of wheat to buy this much land. So if you don't have enough wheat, which we use as the currency to buy the land, then you would have a runtime error. And so in order to account for those, we wrote in just a couple of examples of some runtime errors that we did. So moving on to the character stream. So let's explain when and why a character stream class should be used versus a byte stream class and the read and write the data to the file. So a character stream automatically allows you to rewrite the data from character to character. So for example, using something like file reader or file writer. And the character streams are used to read from source to write definition. Byte streams process the data. And so they're done by byte to byte. For example, like file input stream is used, file output stream. So to go a little further, when you would want to use a character stream, so in Java, characters are stored using the Unicode. So character stream is useful if you want to process text files. Where a byte stream, it uses the bytes, and so a byte stream you would want to use if you're going to do like raw data, like a binary file. So that's what we have here. Let's see. So example, show me one place in your code where you use the character stream. So for us, we use the save game function. We wanted to, it's obviously when you save it. One of the things that we did, and I'll show you in the next slide, but instead of choosing an actual file that would be saved, we asked the user to input in a text format where they would want the file to be saved. And so you can see here with the code we use that we use this to write the character stream. So they're able to write in what place they want to save the file to. Okay, so moving on to saving the character data to an external file, as I said, what we did is when the user, so this comes from our main game model, but when the user wants to go and save a game, it'll prompt them to enter the file path to where the game is to be saved. And then it creates that file path using a text file. And so this is where you have the character stream. And then it would go through, and then if you want to pull up that file from the save game later, you can do that. This, saved us a couple of problems where if everybody has different, for example, C drives is the most common. But if you're using a different operating system or different things, you could just choose where you want the files to be saved. So, okay, and now we're on to play the game. We've just got a few minutes left. So I'm going to back out of here real quick and open up my NetBeans and have the game loaded up here. So we won't go through all the reading and everything, but the first thing, it gives you an explanation of what you're going to do with the game, how to plant the crops and everything here. And so it prompts you to enter a user. So I'm going to enter my name as Adam. So it says you're going to point as overseer to the village, tread carefully. If your people are not well, you may lose. So if you wanted to get help, you could choose option 3 and it'll open up the help menu. And so you can look at a bunch of different things here. You can look at what the goal of the game is. It'll pop up and tell you what your responsibility is for the goal of the game. It takes you through the example of who is Joseph in Egypt, how do you view the map, how do you look at different options. So there's all these different things. So once you've studied and learned enough about the game, you actually want to return, you come over here. So we're going to start a new game. And the first thing we're going to do, there's maps and lists. And so if you take a look at the list, you can see here a list of how many acres you purchased so far, what's your current population, so on and so forth. Now we're going to go to the same thing. If you want to take a look at a map, we can show you how we set that up. And so we're going to start a new game, and we're going to come over here to view the map. And so this is what we're talking about. We set the map up as a grid. And so it'll preempt your option. We're going to go to option 1. And it'll move us that place in the map. So now that we're there, we're going to manage the crops. And it asks you first, how many acres do you want to buy? We're going to do 2. How many acres of land do you wish to sell? We're going to do 0 right now since we're just buying them. What's the amount of wheat you want to give to the people so they don't starve? Let's just do 1. How many acres of land do you wish to plant? So we bought 2 acres, so we'll plant both of them. And then it takes us back to the main menu here. So you can go through, you can move to a different location if you wanted to using the move location function, and then you can manage more crops. I'm running out of time, so I don't want to spend too much time on the game, but I just can go back to the main menu. And then at this point, you can do a couple of different things. You can save the game, or you can quit the game and exit out. Once you save the game, you can choose, as I said, we popped up where you can actually choose where you want to save it to, C, different options. Depending on where you are, you can do all sorts of different things. So, I just wanted to say that I've been grateful for the class. It is one of the most difficult ones I've taken. I did learn a lot about Java, about programming, and about myself. I've been grateful for everything I've learned and look forward to continuing on and learning more. I just want to say thank you. Appreciate all you've done for us. It's a difficult class. Your responses have always been great. And I really appreciate everything you've done. I hope they answered all the questions and went through everything, and I hope you have a wonderful evening. Thank you.